Welcome to my channel, World History Explored. The topic of the Velvet Revolution in Czechoslovakia and the fall of communism is one of the most crucial milestones in the late 20th century. It can be regarded as an excellent illustration of people's activity and strength during the protest against one's oppressors, peacefully and unitedly.
Bringing democracy to what is now the Czech and the Slovak republics, who split in 1993 also in a peaceful way.
This revolution is unique because it transformed the whole nature of Czechoslovakian society in two ways and contributed enormously to the general overthrow of communism in Eastern Europe.
By December, the former dictatorship, now forming democracy, was headed by the intellectual and activist Vaclav Havel.
The question arises, what did everybody know? Is it possible to stage non-violent demonstrations that could topple one of the strongest governments in Europe? The Velvet Revolution did just that, and the signs are evident. At the end of the 1980s, an appeal began over Eastern Europe. The event that marked many countries in November 1989 was the fall of the Berlin Wall. The same event opened a new chapter, especially in Czechoslovakia, where a regime that had been in power for 40 years of the communist regime was to come to an end. It was initiated on November 17, 1989, when students drew out themselves on Prague's roads on International Students' Day. Many have mistaken this for a mere peaceful protest, the oppression of the Chinese government to its own people in 1989. However, this soon transformed into a broadly fueled intensity against the communists. At first, the protests appeared to be like ordinary demonstrators. The students wanted to honor the memory of Czech students killed by Nazis in 1939. But students began to protest against the current regime. The police tried to break up the crowds through force, which made things worse. As the news of this crackdown went on the air, people protested more each day. The protests only extended. On November 20th, about 500,000 people took to the streets of Prague, supporting the students against communism. Although one might not get the impression that there were disturbances elsewhere apart from Prague, protests were staged in other parts of the state, and people of receipt of all classes came out to express their grievances. Demands became louder and constant. A few days later, the leadership of the CP, Communist Party, started feeling the heat. On November 24th, the Central Committee members, including General Secretary Miloš Jakeš, submitted their resignations. The government was slowly yielding to the people's agenda, and the CCP was slowly on the way out. At the same time, a new group of actors, students, and intellectuals created a new organization, Civic Forum. An opposition movement called Civic Forum was formed in November 1989 by playwright Vaclav Havel. That very instant saw Civic Forum rise to the center of the revolt and demands change movement. Thus, the movement was not only to demolish communism, but to restore democracy, human rights, and freedom of speech in Czechoslovakia. The protesters wanted to change despotic communism, to have a leadership aware of the people's sentiments. The government's resistance has started giving in even more. There was a general strike on November 27, 1989. Factories, schools, and offices ceased operations in support of protesters who were seizing the streets. FMSA, realizing they could not maintain their dictatorial rule, agreed to begin talks with the opposition that the People's Committee was leading. The Communist Party decided to step down from power by November 28th, and the federal parliament was working on eradicating communism from the constitution. The revolution was almost over, but the struggle for a new emergence in Czechoslovakia began. In the months that followed, the pace continued to gather speed unabated. The people had come out very clear in stating that they would not want to be taken back to repression again. Setting the frontiers with Austria and West Germany allowed the citizens to travel without restrictions for the first time in several years. On December 10th, the communists resigned from Toto, and a non-communist government was installed. The change was speedy, and by December 29, 1989, the leader of the Civic Forum, Vaclav Havel, was voted president. His election has always been seen as a signal that the age of oppressive regimes was over, and that a new democracy in Czechoslovakia was on its way. The Velvet Revolution as a means was in place, but the end goal was yet to be fully realized, given other hurdles that preceded it. Despite the victory over communism itself, the state construction process was a complex endeavor. Ethnically, the Czech and Slovak peoples started to have conflicts between one ethnic group and another. Relationships between these groups deteriorated to a point where Czechoslovakia dissolved into two peacefully compliant countries, the Czech Republic and Slovakia, in 1993. This split, however, was not used to overshadow the impact of the Velvet Revolution. It had triumphed in bringing democracy to Czechoslovakia. Indeed, this was putting an end to the 41 years of communism. Another essential feature of the so-called Velvet Revolution was its non-violent aspect. The protesters wished not to accept the power of the communist regime, but a revolt did not make it violent. Unlike many other revolutions, the Velvet Revolution was a unique example of how a single nation, acting in unity and using only legal means, could trigger a political revolution. When people chant, strike, or protest the en masse, all these are non-violent. It also showed the world that a revolution could be held through non-violence, and that the ruling government should not be so oppressive. While this is considered a non-violent protest, as mentioned earlier, there were consequences. Former regime opponents, such as signatories of Charter 77 and dissidents, faced serious consequences. These reformists had demanded change during the years when communists were still in power, and many of them paid with their lives. Individuals who were suspected of having contact with the Western world or had an anti-communism stance were usually locked out of their workplaces and schools. The regime fully regulated the media, and there was no room for intolerance towards its authority. Authors, directors, and singers could not write, make a film, or compose a song, as anything against the government or the regime was prohibited. Countries which are not socialist or communists were not allowed to be visited, and whoever attempted to escape from the country was arrested. However, freedom and democracy did not disappear from the consciousness of the people, though in a constrained way, they continued to exist in the minds of the Roman plebs. Charter 77 was a declaration issued by intellectuals who later joined activists demanding more human rights and freedom of speech in Czechoslovakia. That is why the regime never silenced this opinion. The spirit of the people remained unyielding in their fight. The protest movements that led to the Velvet Revolution were the descendants of these dissidents and this desire for change. Although it may be seen as a revolution in the state composition of Czechoslovakia, it was as much a triumph for the anti-communist movement as the other revolutions that year. Thus, before the end of 1989, communism had been overthrown in Eastern Europe while the Soviet Union was ready to disintegrate. The ideals of the Velvet Revolution, the non-violent overthrow of the government, and its success set similar movements in other nations. By demonstrating this, the world saw that change was possible in this world, without having to embark on a military overthrow, hence resenting the wave of democratic reforms that swept through that part of the world. But even when communism started being dismantled, the job of constructing a brand new democracy was only in its infancy. Czechoslovakian economy was sore, and there was a long way to go before rebuilding the country. The evolution to a market-oriented economy was challenging, as the government had to adapt. Privatization, deregulation, and liberalization were no easy processes, and many Czechs without jobs or with bleak future perspectives were seen. However, these steps were vital for the Czech Republic, which wanted to become a part of the global economy and thus develop a successful future. As the country's political culture shifted toward democracy, more focus was placed on human rights, freedom of speech, and political participation. For the first time in decades, the country's people could speak out what they wanted to without repercussions. After the Velvet Revolution, the government led by Havel started eliminating the ruins of communism and setting up a new democracy. Even though the desire for change had already triumphed in the Velvet Revolution, it also opened a new chapter of difficulties and opportunities. In the years after the Velvet Revolution, Czechoslovakia's splitting into two distinct lands underwent an impressive evolution. The country joined NATO and the European Union and adopted a free market economy. The new structure of the political system, in terms of democracy, established after the revolution was set to act as the premise for the country's future growth. However, there remained some conflict, mainly between the Czechs and the Slovaks. The secession was done without conflict, leading to the formation of Czech and Slovak. This opposing of ethnic tensions also showed how non-violence brought peace, and that together, they could stand up to the authorities. To a large extent, the Velvet Revolution is credited for being one of the most important messages of modern society, more specifically, the non-violent outcome of unity. This was made transparent, so that no matter the oppression people are subjected to, they can work for change if they unite. The result of the revolution was significant in changing the Czechoslovak state more. Moreover, the revolution had a universal and regional effect in Eastern Europe. It is a caution that the ability of the people, when aroused for liberty and justice, is strong enough to affect the political changes. The revolution also signified the goodbye, a farewell to communism in Eastern Europe, and a welcome to democracy. It was evidence that, no matter how oppressive structures look and whatever their power, they are not beyond being challenged. The Violet Revolution has shown that revolution can be achieved by non-violent means if the heart of the cause is just. Today, the Velvet Revolution remains an inspiration to movements for freedom and justice around the world. It reminds us that change is possible, no matter how entrenched a regime may be. The people of Czechoslovakia showed that the power of unity, peaceful protests, and a commitment to democracy can bring about lasting change. As we look back on this historic event, we must ask ourselves, what can we learn from the Velvet Revolution about the importance of standing up for freedom, justice, and human rights? And how can we continue to honor the legacy of those who fought for change through peaceful means? Thanks for tuning in to today's video from World History Explored. If you enjoyed what you saw, don't forget to hit the like button and ring the notification bell so you never miss our upcoming videos. Your support means a lot to us. Take care until the next one, and feel free to drop a comment sharing your thoughts. See you soon.